All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the NASEO webinar, Understanding Opportunities to Facilitate Local Solar Energy Deployment through SolSmart and Federal Funding. This is going to be an opportunity to hear about the SolSmart program and relevant Inflation Reduction Act tax incentives and low-cost financing and how those can better facilitate state and local engagement and really serve to advance solar deployment across the country. And I just want to thank the Interstate Renewable Energy Council for their support, along with the DOE Solar Energy Technologies Office. Next slide. So I know we're all old hands at Zoom at this point, but just a few quick items to run through. This is hosted in Zoom webinar format. So as you can see, the only folks on screen are going to be the moderators and presenters. So if you do have any questions for the speakers, please add those to the Q&A box and we'll be sure to address them during the Q&A portion. And that's going to take place after the four speakers have run through their presentations. And if you do have any technical issues or questions, please message my colleague Sandy Fazeli in the chat, or you could send her an email. That's sfazeli@naseo.org. Next slide. So really quickly, before I introduce our speakers and move into the real meat of the webinar programming, I wanted to give a quick overview of the SolSmart program and why it is relevant to state energy offices. So really importantly, while the Inflation Reduction Act is providing incentives and financing opportunities to really accelerate solar deployment, SolSmart is in place to streamline the process by encouraging development and really preparing local communities to take advantage of those provisions really quickly and efficiently. And for those of you that aren't aware, SolSmart is a national designation program that supports local governments in fostering solar energy growth. It supports state and local engagement and really serves to build capacity and streamline the overall solar deployment process. And it is funded through the U.S. Department of Energy Solar Energy Technologies Office, who will actually dive into this program a little bit more and some of their other programs shortly. And the program has participation from a wide range of municipalities, counties, regional organizations. And the no-cost technical assistance provided through SolSmart is incredibly valuable in helping communities achieve that designation and getting recognition for their efforts to really foster the development of solar. Next slide. So states and their communities and local governments, as everyone in this call is aware of, are really diverse with a lot of different goals and needs and challenges. So we really think SolSmart can provide an avenue to not only advance clean energy development, but also spur economic development and job growth. And there are several ways for state energy offices to get involved in SolSmart, which we're going to cover a lot more in depth later, but really those key considerations are opportunities to support state renewable energy goals, equipping communities with technical assistance and expertise to reduce solar soft costs and streamline the review and permitting processes. It also really helps build up that local knowledge and capacity while also serving to strengthen applications for other programs. Seeing that SolSmart designation on applications might lead reviewers to think, they went through all of these efforts and put all of these programs in place with SolSmart. So we really could see an advantage to supporting additional programs in that space. So with this context in mind, I'm really pleased to introduce four speakers who will share information on both SolSmart, IRA, and the connections between the two. Next slide. We're going to hear remarks from Michelle Boyd, a program manager with DOE Solar Energy Technologies Office, followed by Ben Norris, a Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs and Counsel with the Solar Energy Industries Association, followed by presentations from Richard Lawrence and Ed Gilliland, both directors with the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. And I forgot to introduce myself in the beginning, so just for everyone's awareness, I'll be moderating the webinar today, and I'm Kelsey Jones, a Senior Program Manager with NASEO, the National Association of State Energy Officials. So again, please add your questions to the Q&A box throughout, and we will address them after the speakers have finished their remarks. Thank you, and over to Michelle, our first speaker.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to this group today. I want to, if you go to the next slide, I wanted to start with the mission of the U.S. Department of Energy Solar Energy Technologies Office. which is to accelerate the advancement and deployment of solar technology in support of an equitable transition to a decarbonized power sector by 2035 and a decarbonized economy by 2050. You can click 3 more times. Thank you. We do this by driving innovation in technology and cost reduction to make solar affordable and accessible for all Americans, while enabling solar to support the reliability, resilience, and security of the grid, and supporting domestic job growth and manufacturing in the solar sector. Next slide. The Solar Future Study was led by the Solar Energy Technologies Office and the National Renewable Energy Lab and released in September of 2021. It looked at how we can get to a decarbonized grid by 2035. The study finds that with aggressive cost reductions, supportive policies, and large-scale electrification, solar could account for as much as 40% of the US electricity supply by 2035 and 45% by 2050. That is a total of 1,000 gigawatts of solar deployment by the US, in the US by 2035. The US currently has about 135 gigawatts. This means that solar deployment will need to ramp up 4 times its current deployment rate to 60 gigawatts per year between 2025 and 2030. Next slide. The Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, passed into law last year, puts the US on a path to meeting these goals by providing support and incentives for equitable deployment of solar. For individual homeowners, IRA increased the investment tax credit, also called the ITC, from 26% to 30% for the next 10 years until 2032. In addition, energy storage devices that have a capacity rating of 3 kilowatt hours or greater are eligible for the ITC starting this year. Unlike previous ITCs, standalone storage is also eligible for the ITC. There's additional information about this tax credit that you can find on the Solar Office's Homeowner's Guide to the Federal Solar Investment Tax Credit, which is linked on this slide. Next slide. For businesses, back one. For businesses, nonprofits, and local governments, as well as tribal governments, IRA also increased and extended the ITC and added the option of using a production tax credit in lieu of the ITC. A production tax credit provides per kilowatt hour tax credit for electricity generated by solar. In addition, organizations that do not have a tax burden, like local governments, can take advantage of the tax credits through direct pay. Ben Norris from SEIA will talk more about direct pay in his presentation. The link on this slide is to the Solar Office's Guide for Businesses and Local Governments on Federal Solar Tax Credits, which has a lot more details about these tax credits. Next slide. IRA also includes bonus credits in 3 areas. The domestic content bonus is a 10% increase in the ITC or the PTC if all of the steel or iron used in the project is produced in the United States, and if a required percentage of the total cost of the manufactured products are mined, produced, or manufactured in the US. The energy community bonus is a 10% increase in the ITC or PTC if the project is located in an energy community, and that's defined as a brownfield site, a community with fossil fuel-based industries and high unemployment, or a community based near a local coal mine or coal plant. The low income bonus tax credit is a 10 to 20% increase in the ITC only if projects are located in a low income community or a housing project. This credit is capped at 1.8 gigawatts per year. So the Treasury has not yet published guidance on these bonus credits, which will contain important details on how they can be claimed. Next slide, please. So what is the Solar Office doing to enable IRA investments in communities? With the projected level of solar deployment, we know that there will be new and growing challenges to solar deployment, including in permitting, interconnection, and siting of solar. And we know there are challenges in ensuring the equitable access to the benefits of solar. And finally, we know that the technology innovation is critical to driving down the cost of solar and enabling domestic manufacturing, that supports good paying jobs and small businesses. Given my role at the solar office, leading a team focused on lowering the non-hardware costs of solar energy, I'm going to highlight a few of the programs that may be of interest to you. Next slide. Kelsey has already talked about SolSmart, but I wanted to emphasize that this is a key technical assistance program for the solar office. In 2021, CETO, which is the solar office, awarded $10 million to continue the program for another 5 years. In that process, we updated the program to include a focus on equitable solar deployment, financing for low-income households, and the adoption of solar plus storage. And I will also emphasize that there is a terrific opportunity for state energy offices to partner with the SolSmart program to help you meet your goals by deepening your outreach and technical assistance communities in your state. We are currently working with Virginia on SolSmart, and it is a fantastic partnership. Next slide. In addition to technical assistance through SolSmart, the Solar Office funded the development of the Solar App Plus. This is a web-based tool that local jurisdictions can voluntarily adopt to automate their permitting for residential PV systems. The tool evaluates applications for safety and code compliance and delivers automated review of the application, providing an instant permit approval or denial. The tool also standardizes the permitting process, making it easier for installers to work across jurisdictions, and it integrates with existing software platforms, making it easier for local governments to adopt it. The plus means that it can permit other technologies, specifically at this point, energy storage, which is in the piloting phase. Our data find that the solar app deployment can accelerate rooftop PV deployment by reducing local government permitting backlogs, reducing local staff time spent on permitting, and freeing up installers to pursue more customers. Currently, 35 local jurisdictions have adopted or are piloting the Solar App Plus, and we have a pipeline of more than 475 jurisdictions that are interested in adopting it. Next slide. I'd like to briefly highlight the Solar Power in Your Community Guidebook, which was released last May. The guidebook discusses strategies to maximize the benefits of solar to communities, especially for underserved households and businesses. It contains case studies with approaches for reducing market barriers that have been field tested in cities and counties around the country. Many of the examples are from SolSmart communities. Next slide. Like permitting, complex or expensive interconnection can increase solar and storage adoption costs, delay deployment, and potentially increase contract cancellations. Because interconnection can be one of the biggest barriers to solar deployment, we recently launched the Interconnection Innovation Exchange, or I2X. The goal of this program is to enable the faster, simpler, and fairer interconnection of solar energy, wind energy, and energy storage, while enhancing the reliability, resilience, and security of our electric grid. I2X has 4 pillars. It brings together stakeholders in order to identify key challenges, evaluate proposed solutions, and promote collaboration and knowledge exchange. We are also collecting data needed to understand the current state of interconnection across the country and identify the pain points. Using the insights from the stakeholders and the collected data, we're developing a 5-year roadmap for interconnection that will include metrics for measuring progress and identifying research gaps. And I2X will soon be announcing a technical assistance opportunity to ensure that stakeholders have what they need to implement solutions. I strongly urge you to become I2X partners. We have over 400 partners from all stakeholder groups, all interconnection stakeholder groups, and we'd love for you to join them. Next slide. Another one of our flagship programs is the National Community Solar Partnership, which is a coalition of community solar stakeholders working to expand access to affordable community solar to every U.S. household and enable communities to realize other benefits, such as increased resiliency and workforce development. The ambitious goal of the program is to have 5 million community solar subscribers by 2025, resulting in $1 billion in energy bill savings. This will require an increase from 3 gigawatts to 20 gigawatts of community solar capacity. The program provides data tracking, technical assistance, and stakeholder collaboratives to work through specific challenges to implementing community solar. Next slide. As part of our National Community Solar Partnership, the Solar Office is partnering with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to develop and pilot a digital tool that will identify and connect community solar with households participating in government-run low-income support programs. 3 states, Illinois, New Mexico, and the District of Columbia, are going to pilot the tool this spring. Another 3 states, Colorado, New Jersey, and New York, are advising and supporting the development of this tool. Next slide. So here are some links for additional information on IRA and CEDA's funding opportunities and upcoming events. And finally, sign up for our newsletter, which will keep you informed about our technical assistance programs, our funding opportunities, and the latest research and publications. Thank you so much, Kelsey.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Now we're going to move on to our next speaker, Ben Norris.
Well, thanks, Kelsey, and thanks so much, Michelle, for that really terrific overview. I'm really happy to be here today and want to share just a few slides highlighting areas that we've identified working with our members and with our partners in state and local governments in which state governments can take advantage of some of the provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. At the outset, it's probably worth confirming that these slides, there are 5 of them that we'll walk through today. They are pulled from much longer decks that SEIA's had the chance to present to our members and to the public over the several months since the IRA has been enacted, which is a long way of saying that these are nuanced and complex and areas that are candidly still in flux as we await additional guidance from the Treasury Department and from other agencies in the federal government. So if you'd like to learn more beyond what we're going to present today, you can find more resources on these programs on SEIA's website. That's seia.org, SEIA.org. You can find summaries of the IRA and these provisions, as well as links to comments that SEIA has filed with the Treasury Department and the US EPA related to the issues we'll talk about today. We are also available as SEIA staff to help your individual agencies and staff understand more about the IRA. We've already given a number of these presentations to state government agencies around the country, and we'd be pleased to do so as well. You can contact me at bnorris@seia.org. So with that, there are 5 areas that we wanted to focus on today and talk about how state governments can expect to benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act. We focus on 5, number 1, given the limited time we have today, but 2, to reflect the questions and interest that we've received to date, not only from state government agencies, but also from our member companies who will be important partners in implementing projects in the ground and helping realize the full potential of many of these provisions. So at a high level, we'll cover 2 programs that will be administered by the US EPA. Those are the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant programs. We'll also talk a little bit about some new funding for the USDA's REAP, Rural Energy for America program, and some related provisions in the IRA. And we'll also talk a little bit about 2 transmission-related funding programs that will be administered by the Department of Energy. But as you can see from this first slide, we want to begin, as Michelle alluded to, with a discussion about some of the more direct tax-related provisions in the IRA. Specifically, we'd like to talk about the direct pay or monetization provision of the IRA, which is going to be part of the new Section 6417 in the Internal Revenue Code. You are all likely aware that the principal way in which the IRA implements the clean energy goals of the administration is through tax policy, and may have even taken that a step further to conclude that tax policy may not always implicate entities like state and local governments that are not subject to federal taxation. There is one area, however, we would be remiss if we didn't point out regarding direct pay. And this is a mechanism to avoid the pitfall that pre-IRA tax policy encountered, which is that the existing ITC and PTCs, those are the investment tax credit in Section 48 and the production tax credit in Section 45, only benefited entities or partnerships or other corporate arrangements that had significant tax liabilities. Obviously, if you're a tax-exempt entity or a local or state government, those provisions were not previously available to you. In fact, another provision of the tax code, section 50, expressly barred certain entities, including tax-exempt organizations and state governments, from realizing certain benefits related to the ITC and the PTC. For reasons that we'll get into here, the policy has experienced a sea change as a result of the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. And so beginning on the first of the year this year, many of those taxpayers previously excluded by Section 50 of the Internal Revenue Code can now elect for a direct payment of certain renewable tax credits in lieu of taking a credit under Section 45 or 48 related to commercial renewable energy projects. We say that this direct pay provision is only available for certain renewable tax credits because the credits that are eligible for direct pay are specifically enumerated in the bill. And they do include the commercial tax credits that I've mentioned. They also include new tax credits related to hydrogen production, for example, but they do not include credits available to homeowners such as the Section 25D tax credit available for rooftop solar. So who is eligible for direct pay under the IRA? The term used in the statute is applicable entities, and applicable entities include any organization that's tax exempt in the eyes of the IRS. It includes states and political subdivisions, and we'll talk about one modest wrinkle to that section of the IRA in just a moment. Direct pay is also specifically available to the TVA, Native American tribal governments, Alaska Native corporations, and rural electric cooperatives. I mentioned that there is a potential modest wrinkle in sort of how broad the inclusion of state and political subdivisions extends. And that is the question of whether or not instrumentalities of state governments are intended to be included in Section 6417. Instrumentalities aren't specifically called out in the IRA, but Section 50, the relevant portions of which were repealed by the IRA, makes clear that instrumentalities were previously among the types of entities that were barred from enjoying the benefits of the tax credits under pre-IRA tax law. So it stands to reason that if Section 50 has gone away, has removed the bar on instrumentalities, that instrumentalities now under the IRA would be eligible for direct pay. And that's one of the areas that we've urged the Treasury Department to issue guidance on. It also stands to reason that given the various tests that IRS uses to determine when an instrumentality like a library or a school district, for example, is sort of equivalent to a state government for tax purposes, those types of institutions in local communities, regardless of how they're organized from a legal standpoint, are probably within the zone of benefits accorded by the IRA. Something else that we need some clarity on is how taxpayers can elect direct pay. Right now, there's no mechanism through which to do it, and we've urged the IRS to make it as easy as possible, i.e. through one of its existing tax forms or through a web-based portal. We also don't know how frequent direct payments might be. Will they be on a return basis, or would the IRS consider more flexibility in getting direct payments to recipients upfront to avoid the need for things like bridge financing? And then finally, we also don't know how direct pay might interact with projects that receive other state or federal grants. There are some other aspects of tax law that may limit the usefulness or even prohibit the ability to accept direct pay for such projects, but we need the Treasury Department to issue guidance on these issues before confirming. Next slide, please. Moving to the EPA, some of you have likely heard about the concept of a national green bank, and many have applied that label to what the IRA calls the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. This is a $27 billion grant program, and these grants are intended to be used for direct and indirect investments in certain types of qualified projects. And those qualified projects have to reduce or avoid GHGs or other air pollution, or they have to assist communities in reducing or avoiding greenhouse gas emissions. Qualified projects are divided further into 3 different categories with different amounts of dollars attached to them, as you can see here. The eligible recipients for these grants at least on the sort of zero emission technology side, includes states as well as municipalities and tribal governments. The reason that this fund is thought of as a green bank is because one of the ways in which this substantial $7 billion bucket of money may be used, of course, is to leverage that money into other financing instruments beyond direct grants. Although direct grants are not barred and are in fact contemplated under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, the text of the IRA also speaks to things like loans and loan guarantees, which may help potential state and municipal applicants for Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund funds make those dollars go further. The status of the GHG Reduction Fund, unfortunately for those who haven't weighed in, is that comments on an initial EPA request for information were due in December of last year. And under the IRA, EPA has to begin issuing these grants by February 13th of this year. So this is a program that will be up and running very, very soon. To that end, it is also a program, at least as compared to other IRA programs, that will also close that window of opportunity fairly soon. Those funds are only appropriated through September 30th of 2024. Next slide, please. Similarly, the EPA is in the process of implementing something called the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. This can be thought of as funds that are available to states and municipalities to design and implement climate programs. Although there is no bar in the IRA with respect to states and municipalities that already have climate programs in place, this is a program that is very likely directed at entities that have yet to implement comprehensive climate plans. And one of the issues that the EPA will likely be hearing about in a comment period that's currently open is whether and to what extent to prioritize state and municipal and other eligible entities that have yet to implement comprehensive climate programs. These programs, to be clear, would include policies, measures, and projects that will achieve or facilitate the reduction of greenhouse gas, air pollution. And the potential applicants for such grants include states and municipalities. They also expressly include air pollution control agencies and tribes, and a group of one or more of these eligible entities is also itself an eligible entity. There are certain divisions among that $5 billion bucket. $250 million are available for assistance in creating the initial plans, and then the remainder of the money is available to implement the policies, measures, and projects to facilitate GHG reductions once those plans are in place. If you are interested in commenting on the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, you can submit your comments to the EPA by next Wednesday, January the 18th. And under the IRA, EPA is required to make available a funding opportunity by May 15th of this year. Next slide, please. I also want to briefly cover some new funding available for the Rural Business Community Service and the Rural Energy for America program under the IRA. I'd specifically call your attention to the first and third bullets on this slide, sections 22001 and 004. The monies available in these programs are available for rural utility service jurisdictional entities, essentially rural co-ops, some of which are municipally or state owned, and so would potentially be eligible for, in the case of electrification loans, $1 billion in funding, or in the case of loans and financing for renewable energy, zero emission systems, and transmission, up to $9.7 billion loans limited to 25% of total cost. The USDA has funding applications open now, and those, depending on the exact type of loan you may be interested in applying for, those will close either at the end of January or at the end of March. But this is a program that has been implemented pretty speedily by the USDA. Next slide, please. Last but not least, we want to cover two transmission-related programs being administered by the Department of Energy. First, transmission loans. There will be $2 billion in loans available to non-federal entities to construct new electric transmission facilities in the designated national interest corridors. Those are obviously the subject of some potential debate whether or not to ease the ability to site in the designated corridors in the Congress right now. but the IRA is contemplating making it easier to do so, at least for non-federal entities, including potentially state and local governments. And then there are also $760 million available for grants to help state, local, and tribal entities cover costs associated with studying and siting the transmission of, the construction of any type of transmission lines, regardless of whether you're in the national interest corridor or not, provided that transmission project is at 275 kV or above. These are monies that can be used to carry out, these siting related decisions, but can then be used for any related economic development or regulatory proceedings. That funding, however, is contingent on the transmission project actually being approved if you are an AHJ or the commencement of construction. We are awaiting further information from the Department of Energy on the implementation of these programs, but are excited as an industry to see transmission get this particular attention in the IRA. Thanks very much, and I will turn it back to Kelsey.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben, for that great overview. Now we're going to turn to our two speakers from IREC. First up is Richard Lawrence. Take it away.
Great. Thank you. Program Director here at IREC, the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, and work in our workforce development. If you go to the next slide. IREC is committed to a transition to 100% clean energy future, and we do this through three main program areas. As I said, I work in our workforce development area, also overlaps with our local clean energy solutions, where you have the SolSmart program hosting this today. We also do a lot of work in the regulatory environment, where I know we work with a lot of the state energy offices on a variety of issues there with net metering, et cetera. So go ahead, next slide. Just quick disclaimer here, the SolSmart program, as well as the program I primarily work on, our Solar Ready Vets, which has been working on these apprenticeship issues, are both funded by the Department of Energy. So we're including this little disclaimer, we're not talking on behalf of the government, and you can read the rest. All right, next. So as you've seen, presentation previously, the Inflation Reduction Act brings all kinds of different incentives to develop renewable energy technologies, energy efficiency, clean transportation. They're increasing a variety of the tax credits. Big one, obviously, extending these tax credits for 10 years. That is big because many of these large infrastructure projects take multiple years to just plan and get permits for. The new technologies, like we heard of, are now eligible, and there's a movement towards technology neutral solutions here as well, just the greenhouse gas reductions, and whichever do that the best. Big push towards manufacturing, and so that is an area where I know a lot of states are looking at trying to bring those jobs. We heard about those direct pay provisions that are going to open up those mush markets there, municipalities, and we believe the universities, schools, and hospitals, like I said, adders, all kinds of incentives. So, essentially what we're looking at is the tax credits you can get to build those manufacturing facilities. You can then get tax credits on the production of the material, the components that come out of those facilities on an ongoing basis there, and then also on the cost of the installation of these projects. So wide variety of things. We heard a bit of an introduction there. I'm going to focus on some of the labor provisions of some of these. We go to the next slide. So it's all about jobs in large part here, and obviously reducing climate emissions. The projection of 9 million new jobs across all of these technologies, most of those in this clean energy sector with solar and wind. A lot of that will be in the manufacturing area with like I said, a lot of incentives there on both building the facilities as well as producing the materials out of them, and also on the demand side of the cost of those installations. Going to SEIA, they project that the Inflation Reduction Act is going to result in over 200,000 more jobs than the business case as usual, and that the solar industry will be growing between 2 to 4 times the size of it is today, which is roughly 250,000 jobs. So going upwards of just in solar jobs, increasing upwards of 750,000 jobs just in the solar industry over the next decade. Go ahead, next slide. With this, the Inflation Reduction Act is looking to make sure that these jobs, well, sorry, there are labor provisions on a large number of these tax credits across the board with all the different technologies. We're focusing on solar today, but it's the exact same language that's referenced in each one of these tax credit areas. And essentially, they all say the same thing, which is that there is a base tax credit of some level. And if these labor requirements are met, then the project can receive 5 times that base tax credit if they are paying prevailing wages and if they are utilizing apprenticeships for the labor, a certain percentage of labor hours on that. Again, we're looking at solar, so that does primarily, we're looking at the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. So what that results in is the base credit of 6% if they don't pay prevailing wage and hire apprentices, or a base, or it could go up to 30% of the project cost if they do pay prevailing wage to the laborers and have a certain percentage in apprenticeships. So, big focus on ensuring that these are good quality jobs and that there is job training associated with it. But again, these same provisions go across the board. So while we're focused on solar today, we encourage you to look at the other options that, the other jobs that are going to be created in the certain markets based on your state and where what types of development is going to happen there. Go ahead, next slide. So what we're talking about here, prevailing wage, is the combination of the actual salary that someone is paid plus the fringe benefits that they are paid. And it is the sort of aggregate of it's essentially the union wage, but there's a wage salary that a survey that's done to determine the wage rates for all different occupations. And these are, again, focused on the construction of that, which we'll go into next. The apprenticeship is a registered apprenticeship that is registered with the Department of Labor, meets the standards of the federal government in that regard, and is a way to, it's a career pathway. So it's a job training program, but it's on the job, paid work by the employer, and under the guidance of a mentor, also a combined classroom instruction. The individual will receive progressive wage increases as they progress through the program and advance in their knowledge and skills. These requirements go into effect 60 days after the guidance was issued by the Treasury, and that was issued at the end of November. So these requirements all go into effect for projects starting at the end of this month on the 29th. Go ahead, next slide. We'll dig into them a little bit more. These requirements apply to the laborers and mechanics that are performing the construction, alteration, and repair work. So it's clear that this does not apply to the supervisors, the foremen, and the other, the management and professional staff that are involved. It does not apply to the engineers and other professionals like that on the job. It is really the manual labor performing that construction work. And again, not that, even not the foreman that is applied there. It applies to the construction phase of the project for the investment tax credit, and the prevailing wage portion actually applies to the ongoing maintenance of that project for 5 years if they take the ITC path. With the production tax credit, that one's one that gets taken on up to 10 years, and every year that is taken, they need to meet the prevailing wage requirements of that. It does apply to all contractors and subcontractors of any size. Everyone doing that labor does need to be paid that prevailing wage. Obviously, with all of this, documentation is key, and there's, that needs to be documented typically through certified payrolls. There are penalties to companies that take the credits and do not meet these requirements, starting with a pay difference in wages plus any interest to those workers, and a $5,000 fine if just some errors were found. If there was an intentional disregard, that was identified. It's 3 times the pay difference of what the person should have been paid needs to be paid to that worker, and a $10,000 fine. All right, go ahead, next page. Apprenticeships are a job training program, as we said, registered with the Department of Labor or with a state apprenticeship agency. Roughly half the states have authority to approve their own apprenticeship programs in line with the federal guidelines, obviously. This starts off with this year, 12.5% of that construction labor needs to be performed by a registered apprentice. And that goes up to 15% next year and stays at that level onwards. The key piece of that is that it is any contractor, subcontractor with at least 4 or more workers must have at least 1 apprentice. And then there's also the level of those overall hours percentages there. Again, also penalties for not meeting these requirements, and more substantial penalties if there's identified willful disregard for those requirements. There are some exceptions for good faith effort. If a company does try to find apprentices, they reach out to apprenticeship programs like a trade union, and they are either unresponsive within 5 business days, or they are unable to meet their requirements, then the project does get an exemption for the apprenticeship requirement. Go ahead, next page. Again, the example occupations here, there's over 1,000 occupations that are apprenticeable. We're really looking at those construction trades and needing to fit within the occupations that are approved by the government. So the job title of solar installer is not one that is currently approved. So we do need to look at some of these other occupations of where the tasks that person would be doing fits in. So these are the kind of the most common ones that we see are going to be a electrician, clearly, a construction craft laborer, so somebody moving things around the site, assembling some materials. Operating engineer would be operating equipment, moving things around, and carpenters or iron workers, or other people like that doing the racking material. All right, go ahead, next slide. And conclude that a little bit. First, we obviously recommend everybody join SolSmart. Key to making these projects go is also tied into the permitting and other issues like that SolSmart helps communities work. But as you're looking at the workforce development needs in your state or in your region, also remember that workforce development, while the apprenticeship and prevailing wage requirements are for those construction laborers, there's a lot of other people involved in these projects that are also going to need to be developed too. So consider that when you're looking at the workforce development plans. This goes from the sales and development, also the residential sector. It has a lot of incentives that are going to grow that there, but maybe don't have these labor requirements, but do have a need for these workers. So understand the employers that are there. Are you primarily going to be bringing in manufacturing? That's a different type of job skill that's going to be needed than the installation work. Are you more of a wind area than a solar area? Obviously we're talking about solar here, but look at the types of technologies that are going to be deployed. What's the greatest workforce needs? Understand the employers and those needs. Definitely need to coordinate with that workforce system, the Department of Labor in your area, and all the career one-stops and all the systems that you have in place to support workforce development. Engage those educational institutions like those colleges, other training programs that can offer the support, can offer that training to these employers that now need to participate in these formal programs to get these tax credits. Obviously, labor unions are a great way to meet both prevailing wage and those apprenticeships. So help facilitate those dialogues and conversations to get to the agreements there with the labor unions. Pre-apprenticeships, other recruitment pathways, make sure that people understand what their job options are. There's a massive need across the board for people to work in this industry to meet these goals, and adjust your plans to address these needs. Thank you. I think that's it.
Okay, good afternoon.
Go ahead, Ed.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Thanks, Kelsey. So I'm going to go back. We're going to focus. We've been talking about the IRA and all its provisions and what it can do. But the long and short of it is it's going to really grow solar work. It's going to grow demand for workforce. It's going to grow solar adoption, solar installation. So what can we and what can the states do to support localities in facilitating the growth of solar energy? And that's what SolSmart is about. So we want to talk a little bit about how this might work in practice in your state. So if we can go to the next slide. So one of the ways that we work with states is we engage with them as SolSmart recruitment partners. And in this situation, the state would work with their cities and counties and regional organizations to encourage them to participate in the program. They would work on a more formal basis with the SolSmart team to really generate interest by the localities and help them enter the program and achieve the criteria and improve their practices so that they are more effective in facilitating local solar development. This is a very flexible approach. We're currently working with Virginia, Michigan, and Colorado. And in each case, there's a little bit different approach to doing this, but so we are very flexible and willing to work with states in a number of ways. So I'm going to talk about one possibility, I guess the next slide. Well, first of all, I want to talk about SolSmart. We do have lots of resources and we, over the years, have done a lot of training. And so this can be part of this process in working with the states. Here are some of the topics we might train in, things such as permitting, solar energy permitting, storage permitting. We just not long ago developed an energy storage inspections checklist. So all of these are topics that we could train on. And these are also, if you're interested in any of these topics specifically, you can go to the SolSmart website, and we have guidance and guides and checklists that address these specific topics. So this is typically the type of thing we do. We work with localities in SolSmart a lot on the local regulatory process and efforts to improve that and make it more efficient and effective. So you can go to the next slide. A lot of states are facilitating cohorts with their cities and counties to improve their practices in a broad array of sustainable energy efforts. And so SolSmart is a good fit with the state that wants to put together a cohort of maybe 5 to 10 cities and counties and work through various programs and training. You could develop a cohort specifically to achieve SolSmart designation and go through various SolSmart related programs and efforts. Or you could even, if you have existing cohorts that are already up and running, or you're about to start your own cohort on a broader sustainable energy focus, then we could include SolSmart as part of that. So what would that entail? What might a cohort do? Well, we have a next slide. So for example, a cohort could work on Solarized Campaigns. So that is, the various localities would organize a discounted group purchase program, so that say 50 or 100 or even 200 households in their community would sign up to get a discounted price on solar on their roof, and it would all be through a vetted vendor that the locality recruits through a competitive process. And this is a great opportunity. It simplifies the customer acquisition experience. It's much easier on the customers. Of course, they get a discounted price, and it's a great way to raise awareness about solar. And it's, of course, only going to be offered for a few months, so it can create a lot of overcome customer inertia, because they're working to make sure they get in on the program before it expires. typically you see this for solarized campaigns for residential, but they could also be for non-residential. Next slide. And then here's another example where a state would get a cohort of communities to really focus on putting solar on brownfields. This is while the brownfields, putting solar on brownfields, of course, can be involve more costs, such as cleanup related cost. There are a lot of advantages. Brownfields that are former industrial properties, they typically have access to the electric grid. You're not going to find much public opposition to putting solar on brownfields. It's a great way to put property on the tax rolls, and there are a lot of federal and state incentives for doing so. And these incentives were in place before the IRA, but now with the IRA, we have another incentive, which is this energy community bonus that Michelle talked about earlier. So there are a lot of great opportunities to incorporate SolSmart into various state programs and initiatives, and we look forward to the opportunity to help make that happen. Thanks, Kelsey.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. And thank you to our other great speakers for those extremely informative remarks and presentations. We're going to be sharing the slides and recording with everyone next week. So feel free to follow up with any of our speakers if we don't have time to get to your question. So the first question I saw in the chat, which it looks like, Michelle, you might have already answered, but just for everyone else's benefit, would you mind giving a quick update on I2X and some of the activity moving forward?
Yes, I'm really happy to do that. So we've been holding workshops and stakeholder trainings in the past 6 months. We're also setting up working groups on a variety of areas. We have an equity working group, and we're working on 5 other areas. And also we're planning additional workshops and trainings in the next few months. And finally, and we're definitely looking for stakeholder feedback on drafts of our roadmap. So to Eric from Colorado, definitely want to engage with Colorado, and I'll be in touch to make sure that you're getting our emails and that we're finding a great way for you to engage. So thank you for that question. I really appreciate it.
Great, thank you, Michelle. And I know you touched on the equity conversation a little bit in your recent answer, but for all of you, just as states are really looking to accelerate that market for solar, how can they better engage with local governments and communities and ensure that equity and environmental justice lens is really applied to all of their programming? Michelle, if you want to take that first, and then we can.
Sure. Well, I'm gonna say the standard line, which is the first step is to become part of to become engaged with SolSmart, because it is really one of our priorities in the program. And there we're going to be developing fantastic resources and technical assistance to help states and local governments think through this issue. It's new to everybody in terms of really how do we implement it throughout all of our activities, and how do we make sure that solar is deployed equitably. These are not easy questions to answer, and it's going to take all of us working together. And we have some great examples in Solar Power in Your Community Guidebook, so recommend taking a look at that. But for sure, the program is focused very laser focused on that issue, and really hope that the states can engage with us on those questions and test out new ideas.
And if I can add, SolSmart has 75 criteria or things that a government can do to improve their best practices. So we have identified among those criteria many of them that are equity focused or can be equity focused. So through that process, we can say, okay, here is something you can do. Even a Solarized program, the example that I just gave, could have an equity focus. You could focus it on, say, a lower income neighborhood. I also want to introduce Teresa Perry, who directs the SolSmart program. She may have some comments on that question as well, but just so you guys know, she's here.
Thanks, Ed. I always have comments on every question, so I appreciate the little time to insert myself. Yeah, really excited about, as Ed said, we have 75 criteria right now. We are about to launch an updated version of criteria in a couple of months, so keep your eyes open for that. We'll up our number of criteria. We'll actually up our designation levels as well. We'll have a platinum level. We're working on that, soon to be fully vetted within the month and have that launched within a couple months. So really excited about that. We do have, as Michelle said, a lot of equity criteria for communities that have kind of a diverse population. We're also working hard to make sure that those communities that are border to border disadvantaged, that really would struggle to participate in a program like this, have every advantage to participate as well. So would love to work with states if you have those types of initiatives to make sure that those communities can participate and get that, the administrative work done of going through a federal program to make sure their processes are in place. So there's lots of opportunities, and the bottom line is we'd love to work with you.
I'll throw in one more quick comment too. Apprenticeship programs, one of the part of the standards there is that those programs do have to have diversity and non-discrimination and affirmative action policies in place. And as they are administered, they also look at having diversity goals and monitoring those programs for that. So the apprenticeships are certainly a way to increase participation, at least the workforce side.
Great, thank you all. And Richard, on that topic, would you mind kind of expanding on what role you see for states in helping ensure the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are met?
Yeah, the good news there really is that these systems are well known to state governments in terms of the prevailing wage is often utilized. Many states have they're called mini Davis-Bacon Act requirements, so very familiar with implementation of prevailing wage requirements. What this is doing is broadening those same processes that are in place. Same with apprenticeship programs. They're established. Those rules and policies there are well established. Some of the things that we do see some states looking at is what are some new occupations in these industries that could be apprenticeable, and how could those fit? As we said, for example, like solar installer is not yet approved. The state of Florida recently approved an apprenticeship program for that occupation. They do have a state apprenticeship agency there. We've seen the state of Oregon has a longstanding program to certify renewable energy technicians and have an apprenticeship program. Those are both tied to state licensing. So a lot of times the licensing of the who can do the work is really where a lot of the state activity happens. And then you see those apprenticeship and training programs follow those licensing requirements.
Thank you, Richard. And I know we just have 1 minute, but really quickly, Ben, with the direct pay option, I know you really dove in depth there, but do you think you could touch a little bit more on how direct pay can support or benefit governments and nonprofit entities?
Yeah, well, something I probably left out of that discussion is the sort of nexus between a potential governmental recipient of direct pay and then a developer that's actually going to be developing a qualified project. And so some of these arrangements existed sort of prior to the IRA. They come in the form of unincorporated joint ventures or tenancies in common. These are kind of recognized arrangements under the tax code and under IRS guidance, for ways in which governments can directly participate in the development of a project. We expect those types of arrangements to, continue to be permissible under the direct pay regime. But as far as any other limitations or criteria that the Treasury Department might place on such arrangements through the guidance process, we're probably still several months away at a minimum from receiving clear guidance from the Treasury Department. But I would note that even though SEIA and industry and other stakeholders submitted comments on some of those concepts way back in November, the dockets remain open at the Treasury Department, and they are meeting with stakeholders all the time. So if you have interest in making your views heard or talking about some of your questions or experiences to date, I would urge you to engage directly with the Treasury Department as they continue their implementation.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We're just at time, so no time for any other questions. But as Sandy mentioned in the chat, please feel free to reach out to Sandy or myself, and we can also connect you with any of our speakers today. And thank you again, Richard, Ben, Michelle, Ed, and Teresa for taking the time. This was extremely informative, and looking forward to continuing to engage on this important topic.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.